Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to George Grosz in Berlin with Dr. Nathalie Lachmann. Welcome everyone. I hope you're doing well on this rainy afternoon. The Heckscher Museum of Art is proud to present this program as an exclusive benefit to our members and donors. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and for your ongoing and generous support of the museum. We sincerely appreciate it. I'm Caitlin Scher, Development Manager at the Heckscher Museum, and I will be your host for today. Please note, if you'd like to turn on closed captioning, you can click on the little CC box on the bottom of your screen. Joining me on screen in a moment will be our two speakers for today. First, we have Dr. Nathalie Lachmann. Nathalie is the curator of 19th and 20th century art at the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart in Germany. The Heckscher Museum's masterwork, Eclipse of the Sun by George Grosz, is on view currently as part of the Staatsgalerie's important exhibition, The Glitz and Venom of the 20s, George Grosz in Berlin. Also joining us will be Heckscher Museum curator, Dr. Carly Wurzelbacher, who will be answering questions along with Nathalie at the end of the presentation. Please type your questions into the Q&A box on the screen at any time or into the chat box. We will open up questions at the end to both Nathalie and Carly, so if possible, please note who the question is for. Without further ado, I will hand the program over to our featured speaker, Dr. Nathalie Lachmann. Let's see if we can get her on screen. There we go.
Yes, hello. Sorry, I have some technical problems today.
Okay.
But I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. Yes, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with you today. So, yes, and I will start. Is this okay for you?
Yes, if you want to share your screen, I'll hide my camera and you can go on ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So I hope you can see the first page of my presentation. Yes, I'm really happy to be here with you today and to give you a little insight in my exhibition, The Glitz and Venom of the 20s, George Grosz in Berlin. Berlin of the so-called 20s was a myth that is perpetuated until today, like TV series Babylon Berlin. This is a really famous TV series in Germany. So even my grandma loves the series. So we have a lot of theme parties concerning the 20s. So everyone is really thrilled about this period. So just to give you a little impression of Berlin in the 20s, I have some photos from this time for you. So some city impressions from cafe houses and from the dancing girls, but also from the other side of the Berlin. In the 20s, the capital of the first German Republic was the place to be. Berlin was modern, exciting, brilliant, and repulsive. Berlin was bursting with life. In 1929, the metropolis had 45 daily newspapers, 200 publishing houses, 3 opera houses, 49 theaters, 75 cabarets, 362 cinemas, and 300 restaurants. The city attracted a wealthy and independent international clientele. However, the lives of many people in Berlin was far away from being golden. The early years of the Weimar Republic were marked by political violence, mass poverty, and inflation, how you can see here on the 2 photos. George Grosz was one of the artists who lifted this golden and glittering curtain and furiously drew and painted the true conditions of this time. So in the beginning, I just want to give you also some impressions of our exhibition. In the first hall, we introduce George Grosz and important stages of his life. I don't know if you all know Grosz very well. Therefore, I would like to introduce the artist to you, but very briefly. George Grosz was born in 1893. His birth name is Georg Ehrenfried Grosz. Already as a child, Grosz drew and signed his works partly with Grosz. So in Germany, we have this last letter. So in Grosz, I think you don't know this letter in your alphabet. And it's always nice if you can say, okay, the artist wanted to become an artist since he was a little boy. But Grosz, he just wanted to become rich. When he was 6 years old, he already decided to become rich. And the friends of his father, they lived in America, and they told him, okay, if you want to become rich, you have to do something with prints and graphics, because with this you can gain a lot of money. But your name is not so international. So Georg Ehrenfried Grosz, you won't have success with this S letter in Grosz because it's not known in other languages. So we have drawings when Grosz was 10 years old, and he already signed with Grosz. So already as a boy, a little boy, he knew that he has to be really, yes, to be a mark, to be really straight and to be focused and to become famous in other countries than only in Germany. Due to the experiences in World War I and his hatred to Germany, and of course his sympathy for America, he officially changed his name in 1916 from Grosz to Grosz. Since his childhood, America was the land of his dreams, especially New York. He glorified this city very much without having ever been there. In the 1920s, Grosz became one of the most famous artists in Germany, and he was really popular, but also really feared for his satirical drawings. He was a prominent member of the Berlin Dada and New Objectivity groups during the Weimar Republic. So he was a really good friend to Otto Dix, you know him perhaps. He was married to Eva Peters, who very often served him with her sister, like you can see on this drawing, as a model. In 1933, he visited the USA the first time, and he taught at the Art Students League. 1 year later, so in 1933, he moved with his whole family. He had 2 sons to New York because of the National Socialists. So Grosz was one of the artists in the Third Reich who was not allowed to work as an artist because his art was, forbidden. In the later part of his career, he tried to establish himself as a painter of landscapes and still lifes. But he also painted a lot of compositions of a deeply pessimistic kind. Returned to Berlin in 1948. So his wife, Eva, she was really unhappy in the USA and she couldn't speak English very well. And from 1933 until 1958, she tried to convince Grosz to move back to Berlin. And in 1958, finally, the family decided to go back to Berlin. And unfortunately, a half year later, Grosz was so drunken that he fell down the stairs and he died. But let's get back to the exhibition. In the second hall of the exhibition, we show drawings and watercolors created during the First World War. These experiences in the First World War have shaped Grosz very much. His negative image of the world and humanity was increased by the war, and Grosz said that these experiences in the war, he was, however, only really briefly at the front, so we guess that he was only for 2 or 3 days at the front, and then he had a nervous breakdown and he had to go to a hospital. But these experiences awakened his hatred of Germany. His contempt for Germans and the military emerged during this time and became a theme in his works of the 20s. In the next exhibition hall, we show prostitution and sex murder, but I will come to this topic later. Then we continue with the street scenes. The paintings and drawings and prints in this exhibition hall show Grosz engagement with the Moloch Berlin. He shows different big city types, among them students with dwelling scars in their faces, officers and soldiers with medals, beggars, prostitutes, and drug addicts. Already during the war, he dealt with this motif, big city. This trend culminated in the dedication of Oskar Panitzer from our museum. The painting shows the pleasure and the death in one painting. Grosz said about this painting, "I had seen heroism in war, but it seemed worth nothing to me. I saw misery, hunger, horror. Then I painted a big picture. Through a strange street, inhuman figures move. Their faces show alcohol, syphilis, and plague. The city was an inferno of bestial creatures." The artist dedicated the painting to the psychiatrist, poet, and writer Oskar Panitzer, who was accused of blasphemy and insulting the king. Therefore, he had to spend a lot of time of his life in prison. Panitzer died in 1921, and probably he never heard about this painting. In this room of the exhibition, the social criticism comes to a head once again. Even before the outbreak of the First World War, Grosz, who sympathized with left-wing politics, criticized the conservatives. He wanted to appeal to the collective social conscience and take a look at what lay behind the glitzy facade of modern life. The artist was not an objective chronicler. Full of contempt and rage, he revealed the evil beneath the bourgeois mask of respectability and showed what he saw as the unhinged life of Berlin. Sheets like swamp flowers of capitalism highlight social inequality. You see it here on the screen. In the last room of the exhibition, we have paintings from the late 20s. It was during this time that Grosz' hatred of people subsided, like his wife Eva described in a letter. There were easily marketable still lifes, like the cat you can perhaps see it on the right side. At the same time, Grosz was very concerned with the political mood in Germany. In the 1920s, he had closely observed the strengthening of the National Socialists, and he painted Hitler really often. So already in the beginning of the 20s, he observed the rise of Hitler very closely. And you see in his paintings that he has a really feeling for the situation and what was coming. But we will come to your painting also later. Originally, Sabine Rewald, senior curator at the Metropolitan Museum, was planning an exhibition on George Grosz, or rather on George Grosz Berlin years, so to speak, the time from 1917 until 1933. In 1933, Grosz emigrated to the USA because of the rise of Hitler. Due to the pandemic, the Metropolitan could not realize the exhibition. When my director heard about this, she asked Sabine and Max Hollein, the director of the Metropolitan Museum, if the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart could take over the exhibition. However, we have not taken over all the works nor the concept, because Sabine wanted to introduce Grosz to the American public. But since Grosz is probably much better known in Germany than in the USA, we don't have to introduce this artist to our visitors. Especially in Stuttgart, Grosz is very well known, so our museum has several paintings of the artist and more than 100 works on paper. So beside the paintings, drawings, and prints from our collection, and of course your painting, we have loans from different museums in the USA. So the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, or the Hirshhorn Museum. We have loans from the Tate in London, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, Thyssen-Born and Missa in Spain, several German museums, and several private lenders from Europe. The common thread of our exhibition is the theme of artistic freedom in the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was the time in the 20s, so after the First World War and before the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. The Weimar Constitution, this means the constitution after the end of the First World War and the end of the empire, was the first German constitution to protect artistic freedom in one article. But this article is not to be understood as a fundamental right in today's sense, but rather as a hint to the courts that one should respect the rights of artists. Depending on the political attitude of the judge, the verdicts turned out very differently. Grosz experienced this injustice firsthand. During his artistic career in Germany, he was confronted with 3 charges in Berlin. 1921, insulting the military. 1923, attack on public morals. 1928, blasphemy. In the exhibition, we show sheets that were part of all 3 trials and other paintings or drawings dealing with the theme of artistic freedom. These works run as a common thread through the various thematic rooms of the exhibition, and I would like to introduce you this concept today. As I said in the beginning, the First World War was important for the artistic development of Grosz. He not only drew and painted pictures dealing with the war during the First World War, but also after the end, he painted and drew a lot of dealing with the subject of the war. And for the 20s, almost every year, he painted at least 1 or 2 paintings dealing with the subject. One of the most famous examples is the drawing Christ with a gas mask from 1927. For a stage production of an anti-war novel, Grosz produced 300 drawings that served as models on the stage for the stage set. In 1928, 17 of these drawings were published as prints in the portfolio background, which gave rise to a blasphemy trial. Grosz wrote the sentence, "Shut up and soldier on," beneath the image of the crucified Christ. The sentence, I don't think that you can see it very well, it is written on the right of the drawing. So in German, Maul halten und weiter dienen is written on the right side. So I show it with my mouse. So here it's written down. So the judges were sure that Christ said this sentence, so "shut up and soldier on," to the people. And this is, so the judges, blasphemous. It's really interesting that the church said that for them, it's not so blasphemous. So the church was on the side of Grosz, and they said nothing against him. However, Grosz himself, he said that it is not Christ who says the sentence, but the German military. The military, in the eyes of the artist, was so scrupulous, so without any compassion, that the officers would even say to someone who's already nailed to the cross that he must go to war, so that he has to put a gas mask on the face, take his shoes, and he has to go on and serve for the fatherland, even how he feels, so even if he is nailed to the cross and almost dead. The trial lasted 3 years, and Grosz was found guilty in the end. The judges ruled that the drawing and the prints made after the drawing must be destroyed. In December 1928, Grosz had given this drawing to his publisher, Wieland Herzfelde. Herzfelde refused to destroy the drawing, therefore it is still preserved today. Parallel to the pictures dealing with the military and war, Grosz also painted and drew socially critical pictures. Since the First World War, Grosz hated the Germans, and he said about them, to be German is always to be tasteless, stupid, ugly, and fat. Under the title Ecce Homo, Grosz produced 100 works on paper that show the Germans how he saw them. So here I have 3 drawings and watercolors for you. Grosz looks with disdain at bourgeois prosperity. He shows the greed, murderousness, and arrogance of the society in these pictures. The birth, described by George Grosz in lurid colors, is a sadistic event in a confined space. The cadaverous mother is hemmed in by figures of the demi-monde, some of whose faces are disfigured by syphilis and alcoholism. Drawn in 1917, the depiction refers to the horrors of the First World War, which no longer give a chance to humanity as well as at life itself. So if you can see that the baby, which is coming out of the woman, is not really human, so it looks more like a strange creature which is not able to live. The sheets of Ecce Homo, like this one, were also the reason for the trial against Grosz, which began in 1923. Grosz is charged with disseminating obscene images. The judges forbade several representations of the 100 works on paper. Birth was among the excised sheets. What was permitted and what was not depended on whether women were shown with pubic hair. So on birth, you can see even the woman is wearing something really thin. You see her pubic hair. So this was a reason why the judges said that this image or this sheet has to be destroyed. This drawing is also part of Ecce Homo. It shows the murder of a prostitute. Having decapitated the victim, the murderer is washing his bloody hands. The axe is still lying on the bed. Despite the raw brutality of the image, this sheet was not one of those that were banned. Why? Since the prostitute's pubic hair cannot be seen, the judges saw no reason for a ban. Even this is really a brutal image. So, but the prostitute, she has something around her hips and you cannot see her pubic hair. So the judges did not care if the image itself is really brutal, but it was really the only reason for the 100 sheets in Ecce Homo was pubic hair or not. By the way, Ackerstraße, so Sex Murder in Ackerstraße is the second title of the sheet, is a street in Wedding. Wedding is a proletarian district in Berlin. Grosz shows that the murder does not take place in an abstract place, but he names the street concretely. So it can be your neighbor who committed this crime. In addition, this sheet is one of the works that belong to the theme of lust murder. The term lust murder for a sexually motivated murder emerged in the 1880s. So I think you all know Jack the Ripper. Newspaper, keenly aware that sex sells, picked up on the sensationalist subject as that actual cases quickly attained national and even international notoriety. In the 1910s, the subject began to attract artists, perhaps as a response to the changing social role of women in the wake of the First World War. Since the men were in the war, the women left at home became more independent. When the men came back home, really often without legs or arms, they felt useless. And this was a really big problem in the beginning of the 20s, in the end, also during the First World War in the society. At the same time, it provided a way of processing the horror of the war without depicting the slaughter at the front. For Grosz and many of his colleagues in Germany and elsewhere, it became a way of dealing with a post-traumatic stress. So Grosz, he painted and drew a lot of sex murder scenes during the First World War. Often the female head is missing. So I think also here you cannot find the head, perhaps it's under the bed or in a corner of the room, but in most cases you don't see it. If the head is visible, it is usually brutally attacked. Both are related to the fact that the head of a woman was not considered as the seat of spiritual potency, as the head of a man. It was considered that mental abilities were bad for femininity. Women who wanted to educate themselves intellectually were not really estimated. Grosz himself made several very negative statements about women's intellect. So he said that women have only, they need really attractive hips and legs, but they don't need something in her head or to be intellectual. So just for your information, I have some other sexual murder images from other artists in the time during the First World War and in the beginning of the 20s. All these artists, so Leo Putz, Heinrich Maria Darvinghausen and Otto Dix, they all served in the First World War like George Grosz, and they all painted or drew sex murder scenes very often in this time. This drawing is the model for a print that Grosz published in the portfolio Got With Us. Grosz exhibited this portfolio Got With Us at the first International Dada Fair in Berlin in 1920. The drawing Blood is the Best Source, the Communists Fall and the Exchange Rates Rise became sheet 8 of the print portfolio. While an overweight businessman and officer dine together, soldiers kill 2 unarmed men in the background. So this is, you found this pictorial principle really often in the images of George Grosz. So he contrasted 2 situations with each other. You see the people who were dining, you see the officer and the guy from the industry, and you see something which is actually related to this. But normally in the war, no one is dining. But Grosz combines these situations really often because he wanted to show that everything is linked with each other and that the industry does protect and support the military. A soldier visiting the exhibition pressed charges against the artist for insulting the Reichswehr, so insulting the military. Grosz explained that it had not been his intention to defame the armed forces, but merely to document military excesses among various nations. Nevertheless, the court held that the portfolio exceeded permissible levels of satire and sentenced Grosz to a fine of 300 marks. All 3 court cases dragged on over a long period of time and through several instances. So Grosz was alternately found not guilty and guilty and not guilty and guilty. So for a lot of years, he has to go through this. And in the last instance, he always was found guilty. And in most cases, the judges decided that the images have to be destroyed. But Grosz had a lot of friends in Germany and like his publisher, but other artists. And because they did not destroy the drawings, even if they themselves became problems with the courts, we can show these images today. all three court cases, these different judgments are also related to the development of the German judiciary. In the 1920s, the German left-wing judges acquitted Grosz, the more right-wing judges sentenced Grosz. Responding to the trials of artists and writers in the Weimar Republic, the writer Kurt Tucholsky remarked, "Whenever someone around here makes a good political joke, half of Germany sits on the sofa and takes umbrage." When the Nazis rise to power from 1933 onwards, German satire faced increasingly harsh restrictions. Grosz soon came to understand that the entirety of his oeuvre was not longer protected by the principle of artistic freedom, and that he was threatened with persecution by the Nazi regime. He left Germany for America, where he found freedom with his family, but where his works lost much of their relevance. This is also one of the reasons why Grosz became depressive and he drank too much. So after World War I, he had a lot of mental problems. In the 20s, it became better, but then in the 30s, when he moved to the USA and he had to learn that America and New York was not the place what he hoped for since he was a little boy. Yes, it became really hard for him because the American museums, they could not really deal with his art, and the visitors were not so interested, and the art market was not so interested in his art, because in America in the 30s and in the 40s, there was another art famous, and not the kind of German art Grosz painted or drew. In this painting, you can see how the painter's panel is lying in the dust, in the dirt on the floor. It seems visionary against the background of what happened to many artists in the Third Reich. So this is the same I said in the beginning. So Grosz, he has a really good feeling for political and historical situations, and he saw in the 20s what was going on with the artists who were more on the left side in the politics and not on the right side. And he saw in the 20s that if you are an artist and you are more left, you have no chances in Germany. And if you don't paint like the Nazis wanted you to paint something, it would be really hard for you. When Grosz painted the eclipse of the sun, the Weimar Republic was to a certain extent consolidated, in contrast to the early 20s. But Grosz did not believe the situation would improve or stay at least stable. In your painting, Grosz conveys his remarkable premonition of Germany's imminent downfall. In 1926, the painter interprets the supposedly golden 20s as a solar eclipse. The monarchists who mourned the occupied key positions in ministries and universities, in the army, the church and industry, never accepted the Weimar Republic under the leadership of the Social Democrats and Friedrich Ebert, who was elected the first Reich president. After Ebert's death in 1925, he was succeeded by Paul von Hindenburg. You can see him decorated in your painting. And all the conservatives were really thrilled about Hindenburg, and they supported him. They supported him without asking. As a decorated war hero and veteran soldier of nobility, who in the First World War was commanded great power than the king himself, von Hindenburg instilled confidence. In your painting, Grosz shows the huge red-faced president. In the first 3 years of his presidency, from 1925 to 1928, the Weimar Republic seemed to be flourishing, but the good times did not last. In 1929, communist riots broke out in Berlin. A severe financial crisis followed in the same year. In January 1903, Adolf Hitler was appointed Reich Chancellor by General von Hindenburg. What Grosz visionarily conjures up in your painting became reality. The citizens who do not follow the decrees of the government, like the donkey with blinkers who dutifully eats what it put in front of him, end up in prison. You see it in the right on your painting. And also the planes in the background and the burning Berlin should soon become truth. Despite the 3 trials Grosz had to endure, he showed people how society really was and fought relentlessly against injustice. All these topics are still relevant today, perhaps more relevant than ever. This is also something what a lot of visitors tell me after their visit in the Staatsgalerie. They say that they see the Grosz and they see the same problems today. So this is the war in the Ukraine and Russia, inflation, COVID. So they say it's 100 years ago, but you see it and you have the feeling he painted it or he drew it just yesterday. And this is something what was really interesting for me during the last year when I dealt with Grosz, that I saw a really new relevance. And I think 10 years ago, Grosz would not be so relevant than today. Even if you cannot see the exhibition in Stuttgart, I hope that I could give you a little insight today in our exhibition. And I'm really thankful that we can show this painting in our exhibition. And in some weeks you will have it back. And yes, I'm really thankful that I could show you some impressions of our exhibition today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathalie, for the fascinating presentation. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed learning so much more about Grosz. To conclude our program, we'd like to take the opportunity to answer a few questions. And I think Carly is going to join us on screen too, so she'll pop up in a moment. So please, please type your questions into the Q&A if you have any. Let me just...
Thank you, Nathalie. Thanks, Caitlin.
You're welcome. So how is it? Just one question. So this is one of your star pieces, and you have other works from Grosz, or you have a lot of presentations of Grosz. How is it located in your museum?
Yes. So Eclipse of the Sun is without question the most important painting in our collection, aesthetically, historically, and in all of these different ways. And it's really interesting that George Grosz lived here in Huntington, a truly world famous, internationally important artist who lived on Long Island in Bayside and Douglaston, and then moved to Huntington in 1947 and lived here until about 6 months before his death in 1959.
Okay.
Yeah. So Eclipse of the Sun is the most important work we have by George Grosz, but we do have other works by him. And it's so A Beautiful Watercolor entered the collection, I believe, in 1960. And that was a gift to the Heckscher from the Huntington Township Art League, because George Grosz was very involved in the art community in Huntington, which not everyone realizes. And he taught art classes and he showed in galleries here. So a lot of what has entered our collection is interesting in its own right as artwork, but also the provenance and the history of how it came to be at the Heckscher really speaks to his place in the community and his importance to us at the museum. So that's kind of the history. And then looking forward, we have some exciting things planned.
This is, yeah, it's really interesting. And just one last question. So from my side, so is Grosz really known in Huntington? So it's a really famous artist, like in, perhaps not like in Germany, but everyone who is interested in art knows him?
I don't know how to answer. I feel like those who do know his work and know his name certainly recognize his importance. But there's also a little bit of that phenomenon where the person that you kind of don't appreciate what's in your own backyard.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay, thank you.
So here's a question, I think, for both of you, either of you, whoever wants to field this one. In Eclipse of the Sun, why is there a US dollar in the sun? Like the dollar sign.
Yes. So in my opinion, you found the dollar sign in more than this painting. So I know a lot of paintings and drawings from Grosz where you find the dollar sign, also in really early drawings. So in the 1914, 1915, there are some street scenes where you find the dollar sign. And for me, an explanation is that Grosz, he was since his childhood, he was thrilled about America, and you find really often American signs, or you find American houses or so. You see New York, even if it's painted in Berlin, and this is why he preferred, or he yeah, American symbols. But perhaps, Carly, you have a further explanation to this?
I think I have also read, perhaps, well, maybe I'm not exactly sure, so I will just best not to answer.
We had another comment that came through related to the previous point about the people who support the Heckscher Museum. And I know a lot of our board members are very enthusiastic about Grosz. So going back to, is he well known? I think there are definitely Grosz fan club members, especially at the Heckscher Museum. Here is another question. I think, Nathalie, this one might be for you. How did Grosz respond to the buildup and occurrence of World War II while he was living in New York?
Yes, he painted and drew Hitler a lot of times. So when he moved to the USA in 1933, he observed the Second World War. He compared it with the First World War. So I read an interview with his son, and he said that the war was something which was always in the head of his father. He was the whole time, even in America, when he had the distance to Germany, it was always there, and he was a little, yes, obsessed. Okay, it's your history, but he was really obsessed about Hitler, the Second World War, and even when he moved to America, he painted a lot of historical paintings, and drew a lot of drawings where you can find the National Socialists and Hitler. And this was one of the problems, because the American public could not really, they were not so interested in this because it was not their history.
And also, George Grosz's mother, for example, was still in Germany, and a lot of friends. So he's trading letters back and forth and really getting firsthand accounts of what's going on in Germany. So that's taking place. And then just after World War II, in 1946, 47, 48, he starts a series called The Stick Men, which are very kind of post-apocalyptic, and that series of works will be on view in Berlin this summer, and then we'll travel to the Heckscher Museum and be on view here in 2024.
Yeah, with the Grosz Museum, perfect, yes.
Yeah, so we're very excited about that, and of course, Eclipse of the Sun, which we've been talking about, painted in 1926. So in 2026, it will be exactly 100 years since the work was created. So we're thinking a lot about that also.
Our next question, is Grosz's work considered to be part of the Expressionism movement?
It's with painters or artists like Grosz, it's always a little bit difficult to say he is a expressionist painter. So he had, there are times in his life when we have paintings or drawings which belong to this period, but at the same time we have drawings and paintings which relate to the to Dada, to new objectivity. So you have a really potpourri of several influences in his works. And of course, we have some drawings and paintings, and you can say this is expressionist. But yeah, he is not an expressionist painter.
That makes sense. Another question from one of our viewers, did he have students in Berlin like he did in the United States?
No.
Oh, that's actually very interesting.
Right. So
go ahead, Carly.
I was just going to say, so teaching at the Art Students League, an invitation to teach there in 1932 is what first brought him to the US. And then he returned with his family the following year to continue teaching, and taught on and off into the 1950s at the Art Students League, and then also taught private pupils in Huntington as a way to make money, because he was his work was not as commercially successful as he had hoped. And so George Grosz, teaching at the Art Students League, taught some of the most famous American artists, people like like Robert Rauschenberg and Louise Nevelson, Romare Bearden were students of Grosz.
And in Germany, though, in the 20s, when he lived in Berlin, it was not so, yeah, if you want to be a artist, a good artist, you were proud if you do it on yourself. You are not a student, but you learn it on yourself, and you not go to another artist to learn something from him. So in Germany, it was, no, I learned it on myself. So this was in the 20s. Therefore, Grosz and the other artists, though they did not want to be taught or to teach someone, like in the US in the 30s, it was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. This isn't a question, this is just like a little comment by one of our attendees who said, I grew up in Huntington and a friend of mine's father owned a gas station and auto repair shop. Grosz had an old car that needed repair and asked my friend's father if he would receive a painting in lieu of payment for the car repair. My friend's father saw the painting and told Grosz it was too disturbing and his wife would never let him take a picture in their house. So
okay,
interesting
thank
local
you.
history.
Thank
so
you for
great.
sharing this.
Whoever had that anecdote, please email it to me. I will file it in our records.
Another question, how did Grosz's art change after he moved to the USA? Are there any major works that he created while living in the United States? Carly, I don't know if you want to field that one.
Yes. Would you just say again, so are there major works painted in the
while he was living in the United States, and how did his art change after he moved to the United States?
So his art changed in that some of the line drawings and prints and the graphics that Nathalie was showing, he became less interested in working that way. At least that's what he says. And he became more interested in painting in oil on canvas and in watercolor. And when you read interviews with him and in his autobiography, he really talks a lot about experimenting technically, making his own brushes, painting grasses and things with a toothbrush, adding things into paint. So becomes very experimental technically. And then also because he's living in Bayside and in Douglaston and then in Huntington, somewhat closer to nature and by the water. And he's also vacationing or spending summers in Cape Cod. And so nature and the natural world, I mean, so Nathalie has shown a lot of politically engaged imagery, but as she says, his body of work is so different and he's doing many things at the same time. So at the same time that he's creating some of the work we've been talking about that's very politically engaged, he's also painting stunningly beautiful nature-based landscapes in watercolor. And those works we tend to not see as often in books or in exhibitions.
And we have today that in Germany, the late Grosz, how we say, is not so famous. Though in Germany, in the museums, you find Grosz in the 20s, and afterwards, our public is not so interested in the late Grosz. But the Grosz Museum, Kali, you said that the Grosz Museum is, it's since this last year, the Grosz Museum in Berlin opened, and they are really trying to show the whole Grosz, the early Grosz, the late Grosz. It's really nice how they are working and that they want to show the whole artist and only not a few years of this artist.
One more question here is, my husband was at Hill Air Nursing Home, which I understand to be the estate of George Grosz. Is this true? Carly, do you want to respond to that one?
Sure. So I'm still looking into the history of this myself, but it seems like that property, the history of that property and the land and the building that Grosz lived in parallels a lot of what happened on Long Island. So originally that property was a large estate, and George Grosz and his family moved into what they called the cottage or the carriage house, which was kind of like a smaller outbuilding on this larger estate. And that building is still standing. It's adjacent to the nursing home. So if you pull in the driveway, the nursing home's to the left, and the building to the right is where Grosz and his family lived. And then the subdivision that you drive through to get there was being built at the time that George Grosz and his family lived there. So they really lived through and witnessed that development in terms of real estate and subdivisions that occurred on Long Island.
Another Long Island related question. Did Grosz react to Bund being on Long Island? I don't know if I'm saying that right.
I'm sorry, but I don't know what Bund being is. I'm sorry, I don't know this word.
UND. Do you know, Carly, what they're referring to?
I don't.
Well, whoever asked that question,
but it's
if you want to
interesting.
email us, we can try to answer it better with further detail, perhaps. So this question, I guess, for Nathalie, sort of relates to Grosz today and the Grosz Museum. Would you say that Grosz is considered to be a significant artist by the people of Germany today?
Yes. A lot of people know Grosz, so a lot of my friends who are not so interested in art, they know Grosz. So I don't think that all 80 million of Germans know Grosz, but it is art. It is an artist who is shown in a lot of museums. So in the east or in the west of our republic, you have a lot of really big museums where you find him, and you have paintings in the permanent collection. So our museum has more than 100 works on paper, and I know a lot of other colleagues who also have several hundred works on paper. Yeah, so he's really known. It's Otto Dix and George Grosz who are the artists of the 20s.
Oh, we have a couple of folks chiming in to give us some further detail about that question about the Bund. So it seems that that was the American branch of the Nazi Party. That was the German nationalist movement in the US. So
I'm sorry, unfortunately, I don't know something
yeah.
about this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if he knew about that specifically. I'm not aware of him commenting on it, but it is really interesting to think about the history of Long Island in general, and and the history of the Cold War on Long Island. And I think there's certainly before I moved here and worked at the Heckscher, I didn't have a great understanding of where Huntington was, or where Douglaston was, or where Bayside was. And I think a German audience certainly wouldn't have an understanding of that either.
No.
So I think there's some version where George Grosz, moves to the suburbs and lives a happy American life and is never heard from again. But I think, of course, as Long Islanders know, there's a lot of interesting activity happening on Long Island in the 30s and 40s and during the war years and after. And I think that's a really interesting question, how much Grosz would have been aware of those things. I'm just reading up on him and his family. A lot of George Grosz's, he had two sons. The younger son attended Huntington High School. I was reading in his yearbook, it was the largest class ever. So you can just see there the kind of growth of Long Island. But interestingly, a valedictorian of his class, or of a year before or after him, was a German immigrant who had moved to Long Island 5 years before. So I think there are also a lot of immigration to Long Island. And I think there were a lot of German-speaking people in Huntington. So it's interesting to think about Grosz's social circle also.
Okay, our last question, I think, before we have to wrap things up, unfortunately, is where are Grosz's landscapes? Where can they be viewed?
Not in Germany.
That's a good question. I mean, I think the Metropolitan has some in their collection, yes. But these
and the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, I guess, too, they also have some of these late works.
Yes, and so these are collected by institutions, but they're not often on the walls. So you would have to, be searching in the collection search, and then you will find that the Hirshhorn may have some, so yes. They're around, but you just don't see them on view.
Because I think you do it the same like we do it in Germany. So works on paper are only allowed to be shown for 3 months because of light, and so it's we show drawings and prints for 3 months, and then they have to go back in the treasure for 5 years. So we are really strict with the conservative rules. And I think the landscape and watercolors are really, yes, it's really, you have really to take care with the sun. And so I think the colleagues like Metropolitan will not show them the whole time in their collections.
That makes sense. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. I hope we answered most, if not all of them. Once again, thank you, Nathalie, and thank you,
You're
Carly.
welcome.
It was really a pleasure having you both speak, so we appreciate that. Thank you to everyone for viewing today and for tuning in. As a reminder, if you want to learn more about George Grosz and Eclipse of the Sun, you can visit heckscher.org and the Stuttgart's website as well if you want to learn more about their exhibition. Before we close, I'm just going to invite our Executive Director and CEO, Heather Arnay, on screen to say a few words and just wrap up our program.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I did just want to thank Nathalie so much for giving of her time to us
You're
and
welcome.
such good care of our painting while it is under your stewardship. And thank Carly too for all of the time and care that she's put into this collaboration as well. And all of you for joining us today for this event, and Caitlin for her time. You know, we as you've heard, Nathalie, we all do care very deeply for Grosz and think about him quite a lot. And as Carly shared, there's such beautiful provenance and story between this incredible painter and thinker and this town of Huntington and this place, the Heckscher. And you know, one of the as we've been working with the Grosz Museum and on the Stickman project, you know, there's a quote from Grosz that I've been thinking quite a lot about him. And he talked about, you know, what is contemporary art for if it does not tell and evaluate and call for thought or action. And, you know, certainly Eclipse of the Sun does that, the painting, and his whole body of work. And, you know, this having these conversations about the painting with our members and donors is what we hope to do at the museum too, is, you know, the art is not, and certainly Grosz did not just want the painting to be on the wall for people to walk by and look at it and go, oh, that's a nice painting, and then keep walking. When he created that painting, he wanted the people of Germany to be thinking about what was going on at that time politically in the streets and to do something about it. And he felt so strongly about it that he kept that painting and took it with him when he came here to the United States. And when he was here, as so many people have asked about today, you know, what he did start, you know, continue to paint, even as his form changed, and we see this in the Stickman, is, you know, what really was troubling him when he heard about what was happening still back in his homeland. From the stories he was hearing from people. So, you know, we are looking forward to sharing with all of you that exhibition next year as well, when we partner with the Grosz Museum to bring the Stickman here, when we have Eclipse back home as well. And just wanted to also say to our members, if you enjoyed today's conversation, we will be starting a dinner with the directors series, where we'll be having once a month a dinner in the museum, and the whole purpose is to do just as Grosz has encouraged us to do, to think about how art can be just the starting point for conversation, thought, and action. So please look out for more information about that. And thank you again, Nathalie and Carly, for leading us in conversation today.
Thank you too. It was so nice to share our exhibition with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nathalie. Congratulations. It looks really great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. Bye.